My name is Greg Costanzo. I'm an Associate Director of Industry Relations here in the Career Design Lab in the School of Professional Studies. And I'm very excited to introduce to you somebody who I admire greatly, and this individual has made a lot of impact on my career as a professional. He is also my supervisor, and he knows that the check is coming in the mail. His name is Hassan Akmal. He is the Executive Director of Industry Relations and Career Strategies here in the Career Design Lab, School of Professional Studies. Hassan is also a lecturer at Columbia University, in addition to being the founder of Invitation Relief. Before I ask Hassan to come up and take the microphone and talk about the topic of change and sustainability, I'd first like to share a little background information on him. Hassan is an alumnus of Columbia University. He graduated with his Master's in Public Health in 2004. He joined the School of Professional Studies less than a year ago, in May of 2017, after a very successful career as a visionary, a career thought leader, a chair of career education, and director of career services at multiple locations across the country, from New York to LA and Chicago. As a change agent, Hassan is committed to coaching proactive career seekers who will strengthen multi-level innovation in our global marketplace. With almost 10 years of experience leading career services in several higher education institutions, he aims to foster a school and university-wide living, celebratory career culture that's visibly vibrant, diverse, and breathes success. In 2015, Hassan pioneered a connector model based on customized connections and communities entitled BRIDGE, which stands for Building Relationships and Interconnectedness Directed Towards Graduation in Educational and Career Pathways. And he did this at Loyola University, Chicago. He also reimagined the career services model by redirecting students to interview themselves and connect their passion to purpose, crystallizing positive career outcomes and transformational trends in career development and experiential education in the process. By leveraging the career ecosystem that's readily available, he believes that we can help build dreams and witness their impact on humanity. Akmal was a chief executive officer for a public benefit charity for displaced persons in health for over 10 years. He formerly served as a global health and career development adjunct professor. Hassan was a financial advisor for UBS Financial Services, and he was also a business development manager. And if that's not enough, Akmal was a former professional tennis player. He completed his undergraduate studies at UCLA, where he was a member of the top-ranked nationally men's tennis team. Then later, he completed a 5-year prestigious contract as the International Right-to-Play Athlete Ambassador to the United States. He participated in a series of international ambassador trainings that were hosted in Toronto, Montreal, and New York, right here in Columbia University. And later, he went on to complete his MBA in international business. So please join me in welcoming Hassan Akmal.
Sweet eyes, an innocent smile, and gentle handshake, saying peace be upon you from a little street child on the narrowest streets of South Asia would later, unknowingly, change my life. He had nothing. No car, no family, no house, no toys. Yet he looked at me with utter joy and curiosity, as if I was a rock star, with my tennis bags as I traveled through the city that day for Davis Cup training. I reflected on this boy who seemed to surface at different parts of the city at different times as if he was following me. But was he? Or was this something that was destined to help me reverse engineer for my inspiration towards a greater purpose? Whatever the case, it changed my path towards becoming a graduate student. I enrolled in the Forced Migration and Health program at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. In 2003, I was almost kidnapped. I was mugged while doing my practicum on the Kandahar border of Afghanistan. My thesis was on the psychosocial impact of conflict on children. The experience would later teach me how fragile life was and how unpredictable life is, not only in your career, but in your life vision. After that experience, positive psychology opened my eyes to the happiness I needed to appreciate in my life, as well as changing habits in my life to gain even more happiness. I have learned that happiness is gained if not wanted, it will definitely not be there. Life was fragile. After having breakfast with the late Dean Rosenfield of the Mailman School of Public Health, he motivated me to think globally. As far as making an impact, to leverage my tennis, to leverage whatever I had to offer as an athlete, as a student, and my passion to help others. So I took his advice. I took advantage of opportunities. I joined the entrepreneurship community of Columbia University. I took advantage of everything the university had to offer. I began volunteering at UNICEF and other organizations, and before I knew it, I found myself in Medellin, Colombia, working on a project called Niños del Mundo, which means kids of the world. Then I graduated just outside these doors on the steps of Low Library, and I began my own NGO. Purpose is defined as something to be attained. For me, I have learned that purpose is your moral compass and mirror of social responsibility, a means to an end, not an ends to a mean. This girl suffering from Down syndrome asked me for my autograph, but I turned it around and I asked for hers instead. She gave it to me proudly after being shocked that I had asked. I remember seeing those tsunami-stricken areas in Indonesia and in India, on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And I thought to myself, unless we build sustainable solutions, it becomes an ethical question if our interventions have any value at all. Many of those suffering fear very little, but you abandoning them or not coming back. On average, 20 people were driven from their homes every minute last year, or 1 every 3 seconds, less than the time it takes to read this sentence. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees says by any measure, this is an unacceptable number. Overall, more than 135 million people across the world will need humanitarian assistance and protection. More funding than ever before is required to help them. Tonight's session is not just on change, but sustainability as they go hand in hand. Tonight's session is on purpose and interviewing yourself, INNER, reflecting, exploring, uncovering, and discovering the things and the people that move you to that purpose. I challenge each and every one of you this evening to redefine that purpose. And if you already have it, refine it, as we all need a purpose greater than ourselves. Every single one of you has a purpose. It's developed from your passion. And when one is on point with that purpose, it can help change the world for the better. What's your motivation? Thank you. I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker for this evening, Marcia Stepanek. Journalist, media professor, author, keynote speaker, Columbia SPS Nonprofit Management faculty. Marcia is a multimedia journalist, new media strategist, an award-winning news and content editor, videographer, producer, and author of the forthcoming book, Swarms, The Rise of the Digital Anti-Establishment. She develops and teaches digital media strategy, communications, and data analytics in the graduate nonprofit management program at Columbia University. She is founder and creative director of Brand Stories, a Manhattan-based digital media studio and strategy consultancy that leverages cutting-edge media technology and multimedia to stimulate public dialogue, advocate for positive change, and foster a greater connection between audiences and their stories to enhance civic engagement. Her documentary work includes video journalism that explores some of the most pressing humanitarian issues of our times. Stepanek also publishes Videocracy, a multimedia journal, and hosts the forthcoming New Narratives Project, a podcast and public forum featuring media innovators and offering innovative tools, ideas, and media for healing our civic divides. In addition, she writes for a variety of publications, including the Stanford Social Innovation Review, Fast Company, The Atlantic, The Huffington Post, MSNBC, and Pop Tech, among others. A former Knight Fellow in New Media at Stanford University and former Technology Strategies Editor at Businessweek, Stepanek also was the founding editor-in-chief to Contribute magazine from 2005 to 2010, the first news magazine to offer the rise of technology-driven advocacy and digital philanthropy. She was also founding executive director of CIO Insight magazine, the Washington Project's editor for Hearst News, and an investigative reporter for Knight Ridder newspapers in Detroit and Washington. She was also Tokyo Bureau Chief for Hearst News and reported from Asia and Eastern Europe for the National Public Radio, PBS Television, and New England Public Radio. She has received a variety of awards for her work, including the George Polk Award for Consumer Journalism, a National Press Club Award for Washington Correspondence, and a National Headliner Award for Explanatory Journalism. She was the recipient of New York's News Women's Club Front Page Award for Internet Commentary for a series of columns that she wrote about the changing nature of privacy in a digital world. She was also a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. In addition to her academic, editorial, and new media strategy work, she conducts media workshops internationally and speaks frequently at workshops, civic symposia, and cross-sector conferences worldwide. Let's give a big round of applause for Marcia.
Thank you so much. Wow, did I do all that? So, welcome tonight. I'm just really honored to be here among you, and I'm really honored to be teaching in Cindy Lott's nonprofit management program. It's a visionary program that puts us all in the social problem-solving business, and we are all, even in that program and throughout SPS, in the social problem-solving business. And when we talk about doing that kind of work and sustainability in the same breath, it dawns on us how tough that is to do. And so I just want to share a couple of things from, I've been doing a lot of travel this week, and I have been on the road and talking to a lot of people about collaboration. And I think the bridge between social good and impact and sustainable impact is, of course, collaboration. And there's so much experimentation going on now in how to do that, how to bring people together from different places with different deliverables, with different interests, even different political views, and focus them around creating a goal and a deadline for some kind of start to impact. And then the toughest part about all of that is staying at the table. How do you keep people there? And it's all going to take a new form of leadership. And I wish I could say that we know that new form of leadership. We are just starting to figure it out. And I've been working with some groups that are trying to do that. One of the things that they started doing was looking at words. And I'm a communications professor, so I think about words a lot. And I love how lexicographers have long understood that words we surround ourselves with can often offer some insightful perspectives around the societies in which we live and the people we think we are. And our choice of language illuminates our preoccupations with more transparency sometimes than we'd prefer. It's for those reasons that I always look at the Oxford Word of the Year. And just follow me for a minute here. Editors try to choose a word from exhaustive research into what words are gaining the best currency for the year, across the internet, in print, all over the web. And they spend months and months and throw a lot of resources and algorithmic machines to try to help figure this out. And editors try to choose a word that reminds us about where we've just been, but also one that captures the zeitgeist, which is that defining spirit or mood of the moment. And it's a delicate decision. Some years inspire a collective aha moment of recognition, like 2013's word, selfie, right? Other years, the word selected offers a more somber reflection, as we saw with the 2016's word of the year, post-truth. And some of the nominations for last year included the hashtag #MeToo. And that word for 2017, it was just chosen, and it was almost a three-way tie. It was based on frequency of use across social platforms and in news publications around the world. And here are some that came close. It was almost a three-way tie. There was Antifa. And while this was treated as a singular or plural noun, and it referred to a political protest movement comprising autonomous groups affiliated by their militant opposition to fascism and other forms of extreme right-wing ideology. Then there was broflake, a derogatory term for a man who is readily upset or offended by progressive attitudes that conflict with his more conventional or conservative views. Broflake. And then there was something compromise. Now, I know we don't use these words in our language. These were being used a lot online, millions and millions and millions of times around the world. This one meant compromising information collected for use in blackmailing, discrediting, or manipulating someone, typically for political purposes. These are all reflections of our confrontational, divided times and our political culture. And these words speak to the politics of division. The word of the year, though, that was chosen, and that surfaced above all of these other words about division and confrontation, was youthquake. It was a noun defined as a significant cultural, political, or social change, a hopeful one, arising from the actions or influence of young people. The editors chose youthquake as the word of the year because their data showed a 5-fold increase in usage in 2017 since 2016. And most of it was around youth organizing, and not just one-offs, but coupling with one network to another network, to another network beyond that, and so far so good, staying connected. And I think in this youthquake conceit, there is maybe hope for us all, maybe the germs of this new leadership and what it's going to take to sustain us not being so divided, but building the bridges we need to sustain ourselves beyond the road to destruction. In my work, I deal with a lot of civil society organizations and organizations that come together to achieve measurable goals, measurable impact against a set of goals. And so often, so many people in the social good space talk a lot about wanting to do it, and they're so passionate about doing it. And they're finding more and more that they need to go beyond their walls to get this done. And it's not easy, obviously. I want to share a little video that's kind of a sizzler, we call it in the business, a teaser for an event to kind of launch one of these new collaboratives. This past year in the social good space, we've seen a lot of attempts to bring people together starting from the grassroots. Traditional people, traditional philanthropists, Agnes Gund, who sold a favorite painting of hers for $150 million and used $100 million to start a new Art for Action fund, and then persuaded 25 other art collectors among the 1% here in New York to do the same, to start something from the grassroots to address issues of social justice. And they've started, and they've stayed together for about 6 months. That's one of the seeds. We're seeing trends in the philanthropy space toward big bets giving, social bets to create action. And in this political culture, we're also seeing more and more philanthropy being used to achieve political ends, either to advance our new president's agenda or to resist it. Things are becoming very political. But the irony is for us to come together, we need to know how to lead ourselves to keep us together. And that's the big challenge, I think, here tonight, and the challenge for sustainability. Here's the new collaborative. We call them collaboratives, and a lot of people are now forming from local grassroots and choosing people from business and people from the arts and people from education and people from healthcare to all come together and identify and advance their highest point of contribution toward a specific goal. And here's one of the newest ones, an experiment that was started by the Greater Boston Food Bank to accelerate a pathway to hunger and alleviate it in the founder's lifetime. But with McKinsey and with Hearst and with Stop and Shop, the retailer, and with MIT for data, and all sorts of partners. And it's a very ambitious project so far. Let me show you the sizzler for the first event.
We live in a volatile world, a time of great anxiety and change. Our democracy has never felt so challenged, nor so alive.
What's occurring in our country is deeply uncertain, and therefore to act today, it's going to require working with others.
More and more people seem to be paying attention to this conversation, and more in different voices than just ours are joining and pushing forward the conversation.
Making a pathway out of poverty is the great task of our generation as a whole.
There shouldn't be no one hungry, and you know you have more than enough to eat. There shouldn't be a problem with helping so other people can have access to the basic food.
There's a stereotype around what the face of hunger looks like. And it's in many cases the middle class family that's really challenged to make ends meet.
What is the connection between health, hunger, and lots of other social issues?
There's enough food in this country to feed everyone. We just have to think about it differently.
Food is medicine. Food is an issue of policy. Food is the lowest cost intervention on your health.
If you have enough dedicated individuals around a social problem, then they can come together and work towards it.
Bringing together organizations who are smart and individuals who are passionate to help people to feel better, be healthier, and more productive. It's a chance of a lifetime.
Think of it as a local and global roundtable for collective action, without all the noise.
How do we make it happen? How do we do it in every day?
The effort of coming together at the same table, it's already a first step.
Join us March 26th at the Boston Public Library for the start of a new conversation.
And they're not the only ones. This new anti-establishment giving is also emerging as we start seeing the growing political influence of this new breed of younger activist givers and social entrepreneurs who are pooling their lesser contributions into new philanthropy networks and consortiums focused on promoting, if not salvaging, social action efforts, championing some of the most popular and social causes of the day. So while social good leadership may not dominate the headlines, nor interest a lot of the talking heads who would rather talk about the presence of Russian fake news factories abroad and chaos in the White House, the social good movement is evolving too. And it's forcing many of our country's cause-minded philanthropists and social entrepreneurs to create new ways to turn this tumult of unexpected and unprecedented challenges into fresh opportunities to assert their values to make the world a better place. And that's the opportunity for all of you. And where hundreds of new jobs are being created for new leaders to create where others have been unable. What we have seen is, in this particular experiment, a real passion, the setting of clear goals. The Greater Boston Food Bank is struggling, as is this new collaboratory. And they are actually a metaphor for where we are now in this sector, in many of our sectors, and where we need to be. So we go today from creating and finishing a website for them around collaboration and the importance of collaboration, right? But we're still caught up in things like this logo has to be bigger than the other logo. This person gets 5 minutes at the table and this person gets 20, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of having to learn how to listen and learn how to keep people around goals and learn how to manage those goals and learn how to identify those highest points of contribution around the table and play to those highest points of contribution and measure them. We've seen grand experiments, the Clinton Global Initiative, for example, coming together to kind of bring all of these people from all of these sectors to create change, and some of them did, and some of them didn't, but we keep trying. But I'm really emboldened and encouraged by some of the efforts, and sometimes just coming to the table is the first step. So tonight, I hope our conversations can talk about this challenge of leadership and what we can do to go from our old way of doing things to really not just talking about coming together and collective action and collaboratories and all these buzzwords, but to really figure out a new kind of leadership that can truly make a difference and rebuild those bridges that seem to be lost on other fronts. I think right now I just want to take some questions from the audience in terms of where their experiments on sustainability is and whether they can share some lessons about leadership and where they're getting stuck. Anybody have a question about the kinds of stories that have to be told or lessons of leadership that need to be managed? Anyone? How many of you have attempted collaborative leadership? Yes? Okay. Has it worked for you? What are some of the biggest challenges? Please.
Teachers on board.
Mm-hmm. And what has been the biggest challenge?
Getting them to acknowledge that there's a lack of student-teacher relationship.
Okay, so getting them to acknowledge what some of the challenges are to begin with. What about some of the others who raised their hand? What was one of the big challenges around that? Anybody else? Yes.
Hello, this is Ammar Yunus. I'm a third-year student in construction administration program. Mm-hmm. Before this program, I was a local contractor in New York City, a small contractor, home improvement contractor. After, I just want to thank you, our Francisco Pineda, who have given me opportunity to study in master's program in now I'm consultant in project manager. So I have worked in, got the knowledge how the Hudson Yard have made it, how we made Second Avenue project, what was the problem in World Trade Center. And through all the knowledge, now within 3 years, we don't have that career development program. So I just want to thank you, Mr. Hassan. Because of you, I got 100K yesterday job offer. This is really, really because of you. You have given me all the opportunity for in one plate, and the government is checking us. But I just want to share above the job also one more thing. I got one problem of career week. After attending the career week, now I decided I want to start my own. Why not I can start my own? Because that confident, that much level of knowledge, when I have it, so I want to move further with my own construction company and with my own consultancy company. So all these things because of Mr. Hassan Kamal Akmal. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. This is
Let's hear it for
really,
Hassan.
really great for you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So one of the encouraging things, and where most of the jobs are now in terms of careers in this leadership field, and especially kind of in my corner of the planet on sustainability, is getting people centered around their why. So many organizations that seem to be having a hard time collaborating for sustainability are still arguing over why everybody's there. Not just so much the goal, but what's the so what? Why this, why now, why us, and so what? And so often, as many of my students know, when you find that core value, when you find that reason for being, it's helpful, but it really challenges all of us to come up with ways for a group of people with diverse interests to achieve that part of why, and to share credit, and to share encouragement, and to really be in it for the long term. And I think that's where a lot of the challenge is. Sustainability is very much the ability to be resilient, to be able to pivot quickly, to be able to reconstruct something, to define failure as something that needs to be known as valuable information very quickly, so that it's not so much about failure, but the opportunity to pivot. And all of this stuff is hard to do if you don't have a team that knows that you're in it for each other, and you know that your goals are different, but you know you're there for the same reason. So it's this notion of essentialism, the highest point of contribution. And what is that in a group? So we talk a lot about this in our companies today and in our nonprofits today. But to take all of this to the next step and to meet some of these goals for sustainability, whether it's hunger, whether it's the environment, we're running out of time to make change less difficult for all of us. And I think for leaders of the future, and where the jobs really are in those management level jobs. Not so much what do you know about food or what do you know about poverty, but what do you know about bringing people together and keeping them together? And that's where the skill sets are really going to matter. I mean, data is great. If you can tell a story, that's even better. But to listen and to bring people together is tough. And we're just learning. And I know here at Columbia, we're just starting to teach some of this in the nonprofit management program as well. And so it's a big challenge. But as the Greater Boston Food Bank is finding, if it can't be done there, and if this trust cannot be built there, and if we cannot hire skill sets or train our workers to be able to play nice with others, and if we as a sector are still not sharing some of our data and research for the common goals of those causes that we combined support, it kind of seems like we're just going to run the clock down. There are 27 different breast cancer nonprofits in Manhattan alone. These are networks, they're valuable, but just think of what they could achieve together, right? Just think of what they could do together. So I think that's the biggest hurdle, and whenever I hear about sustainability, I think about the story, I think about the why, and then I think about the listening required to bring people together and to keep them there. So I hope that as Career Week kind of winds down, we can all find a way to formalize this and turn it into the kind of learning and the kind of reward system on the job that really rewards these kind of behaviors. Technology changes us, changes our behaviors and our relationships to each other. It can help, but there's no substitute for clarity and common purpose. And Hassan talked about purpose and knowing your purpose. And I think the core of sustainability is that purpose writ as leadership that that can pivot to keep people together, but ultimately is going to deliver some big goals. So thanks for hearing me make that point a few times. And also thank you for your passion and your interest and your education. Use it to make change and to prove that this stuff can be done, because it's going to save us. Thanks for your time. I'm sorry.
Thanks so much. Let's give Marcia a huge round of applause. I'd now like to invite our panelists up one by one. I'll just give you a little bit of background on each one of them so you can get to know them a little bit better. First, we have Sarah Stender, Director of Operations and Sustainability at Green Matters. Sarah is the Operations and Sustainability Director at Green Matters, the fastest growing green lifestyle media company. She has a master's in sustainability management from Columbia University and was recently spearheading sustainability strategies at RTR since 2015. Prior to her formal education at Columbia, Stender was a captain in the United States Army, serving as a military intelligence officer. She is a combat veteran with 2 deployments to Iraq. Following her service, she worked for Boeing Commercial Airplanes in international strategy and business development. Her passion for a career in sustainability came about from working closely with the environmental strategy team while at Boeing. Stender is looking forward to helping Green Matters make sustainability news and best practices accessible to a larger audience, ultimately growing the company's reach and positive impact on the environment. Welcome, Sarah. Next up, Sophie Yankari. Good? All right. Green Climate Fund Readiness Consultant, UNDP. Sophie is a consultant at the UNDP, where she serves as a regional technical advisor and global coordinator for the Green Climate Fund Readiness Program. She has a background in international development consulting with USAID, with a focus on climate change and clean energy. She left Washington, D.C. for the Master of Science in Sustainability Management program here at Columbia University because she was convinced that being socially and environmentally responsible for making a profit were not mutually exclusive. But she didn't have the tools or vocabulary to prove it. While at Columbia, she tailored her coursework to sustainable finance topics, working with the Columbia Center for Sustainable Investment. As You Sow and 2 Degrees Investing Initiative. Her capstone team reviewed pension fund sustainability strategies to screen for decarbonization targets with Mercer and the OECD. She is now determined to build a bridge between the asset managers in developed economies that are looking for climate-smart investments and projects that need financing in developing countries. Welcome, Sophie. Next up, we have Javed Amidi Abraham, Lead Systems Designer, Agritexture Consulting. Javed is a lead systems designer for Agritexture Consulting, where he serves as the senior technical consultant on controlled environment agricultural projects globally. Prior to his involvement with Agritexture, he served as the vice president of Infinitree, where he developed carbon capture tools for CO2 enrichment in greenhouses. Previously, he spent several years in commercial hydroponic production roles and helped start a hydroponic and greenhouse equipment distribution business. He holds undergraduate degrees in history and environmental studies from SUNY Binghamton. Welcome, Javed. We also want to invite Marcia Stepanek, our keynote speaker for tonight, journalist, media professor, author, keynote speaker, and nonprofit management faculty. Welcome. How about we start with introductions? Maybe just tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of how you ended up in your current position. We can start on the end.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Sarah Stender again. I think for me, in regards to kind of how I got to where I'm at, I think first and foremost, I definitely, transitioned careers. Obviously, you heard my background. I was in the military. Following the military, I was at Boeing, and I really just decided that I wanted to make sure that whatever I did in my career, that I was doing what I like to say, doing well by doing good, and helping a company do that. And so that was like the big transition for me, and realizing that I wanted to come to Columbia and do the sustainability management program and really get to find a way and transition my career and have the tools that I needed in order to become a sustainability professional. And I think that from there, I just really looked into companies that had the mission and the core values that I wanted to align myself with. And so most recently, I was at Rent the Runway, and I was running an operations department there, using my skill sets in operations and strategy from the military and from Boeing. And then on top of that, running the sustainability strategies. I recently just transitioned to Green Matters, and I'm now getting to really help build our company and build our audience of really telling amazing sustainability stories and getting to capture an audience of everyday people and making really positive information be, this idea of so what, which I love, and really being able to give our audience an opportunity to take action. And for those who don't understand what sustainability is, or they know it's important, but what do they need to do and how do they get to do it in their daily lives? So that's where I'm at with Green Matters right now, and we're really excited to be able to start telling these stories and making it very educational and accessible to people.
It's very difficult to follow, but my name is Javed Amidi Abraham, and I work for a company called Agritexture Consulting, and we do mostly feasibility studies for entrepreneurs and investors who want to get into the local agriculture and CEA space. That includes greenhouses and vertical farms, and we focus mostly on hydroponic applications. I came into the space from a varied ag tech background. As you heard before, I started a greenhouse and hydroponic equipment distribution business, and then got into some carbon sequestration applications with a company that was actually a spin-out of Columbia University. I've always been very passionate about doing work to mitigate climate change in one way or another. and I pivoted from the direct air capture field into more sustainable local agriculture applications because of that drive. And I've been very pleased with the work we've done at Agritecture. We are expanding quite rapidly and getting into some really interesting spaces in 2018.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. Let's see, I think that my career comes from a mix of like a very unbridled sense of injustice and a desire to be a Robin Hood type. And I wanted to do something about it, and it started with just, rebelling against the system and wanting to fix all the world's problems. I think I told my dad when I was 7, I didn't understand why the rich people didn't just give the poor people their money. And if they could just make me leader of the world for 3 minutes, I would fix it for them. So I think they're a little bit worried about that. But so I was in international development consulting for 7 years before grad school, mostly with US, well, our main client, 90% of our work was USAID, and I was doing project design for Latin America, and fell into clean energy and climate change, mostly because Obama was elected president and he launched the Global Climate Change Initiative, and no one at our company knew what that meant. So I kind of jumped on it, and I was like, all right, let's figure this out. And it was really interesting, it was really powerful, and I saw this opportunity that was both exciting and terrifying, because we're looking at all these underdeveloped economies that want to grow, but if they grow the way that the rest of us grow, we're going to destroy our system. So how do we convince them, and how do we make it possible for them to grow up to the rest of our levels or past our levels without incurring the damage that we did? So that is really what drives me. And I was convinced that we can do it. There is a practical way to do it that doesn't compromise economic growth, because there's this idea that being socially and environmentally responsible costs profit. And I had no idea how to explain that, but I was very sure that we could do that, which is what led me here to Columbia. And I got all the tools that I needed for sure, and kind of worked my way over into sustainable investing, and loved this idea that we just need to learn the other side's language and speak that language with them to motivate people with lots and lots of money to look at these problems and solve them with us. So right now, I'm wrapping up a contract with the UN Development Program, where I manage 2 green climate fund portfolios in, I think, 32 countries. They're small projects. It's getting them ready to access the Green Climate Fund, getting the governments ready to access the Green Climate Fund. I finish February 28th. I'm taking a month off, and then I move to Norway to take a job with Cicero as a senior climate finance advisor, doing second opinions on green bonds and climate risk analyses for companies. So, yeah, transitioning.
Wow, that's a hard act to follow. Well, I think I got into this because I just saw so many people whose stories were not being told, and once told had an impact. And I come at this from real concern over our civic divides, how people talk past each other, how stories are often told in black and white, one bookend to another bookend, but the most fascinating stories and truths and realities are in the grays in between. And to find all that brilliance under a barrel and to kind of set it free, particularly in the nonprofit sector, which is my passion, where so much good is being done and so much things can be done better and more effectively and in partnerships. And I just so often talk past each other, and a lot of organizations don't have their why. And so I think in terms of my passion for this, I'm training right now. I have a contract with UNICEF where I'm going around the world to their communications departments and training their communications departments on how to tell their stories. And it's kind of like the cobbler's shoes. They're doing this amazing work, and they're telling everybody else's stories. But when it comes to telling their own, they need some help with that. So it's a terribly exciting work. It's a very big challenge, but it's so rewarding when you see the look on people's faces, not only the people telling the stories, but the people who are hearing that story for the first time, because it's finally around that real clear sense of what that highest point of contribution is to the world and how to keep those things going.
Great. Well, now they have the right person to help them with the storytelling. So Marcia, she explored some of the importance of collective understanding that change and sustainability are part of everything that we do, right? You heard a little bit about the coordination of breast cancer agencies and things like that. We stand at a moment in history where the challenges are intensifying and the window for action grows smaller every day. So the need for leadership is greater than ever. When we think about the quote, we all need a purpose larger than ourselves or greater than ourselves. In light of this quote, for each of you, and I know you shared a little bit, could you go a little bit deeper and talk about how you've connected your personal and professional goals with the mission of your organization? More specifically, for example, did you get into this position by accident? What was your career trajectory? How did you end up in your current position?
Sure, and I'll go ahead and start. I think for me, in coming from a military background, the reason, often it doesn't seem like going from being in the military and then transitioning to sustainability, where is that connection? I think fundamentally, though, in growing up and being instilled by my parents a sense of service, that's the main reason why I served in our military. And for me, that sense of service is also a sense of purpose. And I think for me, it's an easy transition for me to continue a career where I get to serve something larger than myself. And I think, at the end of the day, having that purpose and making sure, like, going to work every day, everyone goes to work, everyone has to sustain their living. But at the end of the day, I think getting to choose to go to work and doing something purposeful is what really made it, for me, an easy decision that, okay, I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna get a degree, and I'm gonna focus on making sure that whatever I do every single day, I'm gonna be doing it and making sure it's helping business do business with a conscience. So I think that transition now to Green Matters, I think not only before I got to be a sustainability professional for a company and really help one company do that, now I get to go and tell the stories of every company in a positive way, like showing how they are making a difference, and then making it so it makes it really easy for our audience to understand, like, where their purchasing power lies, and understanding the transparency of the companies that they're supporting, as well as just understanding, what they can do at the local level. It's not just about business. It's also, we're also highlighting stories of governments that are leading the charge, and small communities and small towns that are making a difference. And I think that's where it's really going to change to this, again, going back to this idea of so what. Every story that we're telling, we're trying to make it very easy for that so what is, okay, what's the next actionable step that I can take? So I think that's where, I am very fortunate that not only do I get to, before, and also help my company with its core values and making sure that, we're sustainable in nature and in what we're doing, and that we're telling honest and real stories and really providing information to people. Now I also get to help tell stories for a whole host of businesses and nonprofits and everything like that. So definitely not, I don't have a media background. By no means did I think, when I was graduating in 2015, no way did I think, oh, I'm gonna be at a green media company in 3 years. But yeah, so I think, you never know what path you're going to get to, but I think keeping in mind the purpose, and that's really how I got here.
Very nice, thank you. Javed?
I guess a lot of the businesses I've worked for have been kind of parallel in ideology. The idea of renewable energy or carbon drawdown or changing agricultural systems to be less carbon intensive are all similar. But in my current role, I find that serving a multitude of clients, you get clients that don't necessarily want the same thing as your business does, and we are beholden to what our clients want, and sometimes they're more enamored by the technology than they are of the true implications of how it's affecting the marketplace or the environment. So I often find myself in an educational role where I have to present them with the options, and they get to decide for themselves what kind of business they want to build. But as far as the path I've taken in finding myself here, I guess it has been somewhat linear and unvaried in that respect.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to be completely honest. I think when I graduated from undergraduate, I had that sense of injustice, but I had no idea what jobs were because my undergraduate didn't prepare me for that. So I knew I couldn't be a doctor. I tried to be a lawyer. I worked at a law firm, and that didn't work. They all told me not to be a lawyer. So I went into consulting for international development because my dad worked at the World Bank, frankly. So it's what I knew. I knew it was a career path, and I think that it was just kind of an easy field for me to understand. And then I find myself still in it, even though I get disillusioned, because it's very frustrating at times. It's also endlessly inspiring. And I find myself digging in deeper because I'm compelled now, not just by the sense of justice, but also the fact that this makes sense. Assuming that we can grow, assuming that we can, that economies can grow unbridled and without limits within a limited system, a resource-constrained system, is nonsense. And so I am in it because I'm sure that I'm right. And I'm trying to convince everyone around me that I am, and learning everyone's language in order to do so. So it's going to be a really, really long ride, and I'm not sure that we're going to get there, but yeah, that's how I ended up here.
I like how you all of you kind of refer to the role we have in being translators, kind of translating not only initiatives and hopes and dreams, but also trying to bring us all together on the same page. I think I grew up in a very boisterous family, in an immigrant family, and I was literally translating from one end of the family to the next. But also, I was the one who would be brought in to keep the peace or break up the fights. And yes, and I think what I really kind of started falling into with media and so forth is that power of having people come together around kind of talking stuff out. And when falling into this career and kind of growing in the career, it was always clear that there were so many people who were saying the same thing but didn't realize they were. And so when we talk about sustainability and we talk about all of these issues, there's also this feeling that it's kind of talk, but where is it leading, and show me the proof that it's really doing something, and tell it to me in a sexy way. So it's not just this kind of antiseptic kind of thing. And so I think part of the sustainability, part of leadership that's going to be required to bring us all together and speak the same language around this and accelerate our common purpose is going to be translating and listening to those stories. And I think that's so important. And it's not just storytelling in kind of this Pollyanna kind of way, but I think it needs to be very strategic internally, externally, and with impact stories. Prove it, don't tell me, show me.
I like the sound of that, impact stories. If you see, like, actually, you're hearing a lot of passion, right? So even if you're passionate about Robin Hood, right? Sophie's reverse engineering from that passion, and here she's making a career out of it. So I think that's very important. So many organizations struggle with the challenge of embracing change and sustainability, broadly defined as a central strategic imperative. So this is critically important. It's a critically important problem. What can be done about it? Please share from personal and professional experiences. Anyone want to kick us off?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So many organizations struggle with the challenge of embracing change and sustainability, broadly defined as a central strategic imperative. It's a critically important problem. What can we do about it? Professionally or personally, any experiences that you have to share?
Thank you.
Okay. I'll jump in and I'll say in my role right now, we're really just facilitators at the UNDP. We're kind of like a contractor for the governments that want to better understand the Green Climate Fund. So they call UNDP and they say, hey, I don't get it, help. And so the government of Guinea is one of the governments that we're working with, and the country office in Guinea, our country officer called me and said, hey, how do I engage the private sector? And I said, I don't know. Like, that's such a broad question. We need to narrow it down a little bit. I was telling Hassan about this earlier. And this, I think that there's a big divide between public sector and private sector, and they don't necessarily understand each other, especially where I sit. And so I worked with the country office to kind of, I actually pulled in Lynette Witter, one of the professors at SPS, and she teaches a course on urban metabolism, looking at resource flows through cities. And I pulled her in because if Guinea wants to talk to the private sector, they have to understand, they have to speak the private sector's language, understand what matters to them, right? And if the government of Guinea has to reduce emissions from their economy, what sectors in Guinea are driving emissions? And so right now I'm working with a team of 4 or 5 students from Colombia, from the Sustainability Management Program, to help the country office in Guinea talk to the mining industry and understand what the best practices are in that industry to lower emissions while still maximizing operations and developing and creating jobs and bringing investment into the country. So I'm not sure if that all made sense, but as far as integrating sustainability, like I think that, again, pivoting a little bit and understanding, not just listening, but understanding what motivates your partner and aligning those interests, I think is definitely hammered into us at the Sustainability Management Program, and I have found it very applicable in my career.
Yeah, so to build off of that, I think my recommendation is Freya Williams wrote the book Green Giants, and in there she really highlights these corporations that really know, who are really now, again, by the title, Green Giants. And one of the fundamental things that all these companies that are hugely successful is that they have an executive, they have someone on the C-suite who is championing sustainability as part of the entire company's core values. If not their core values, but at least to then also what they're providing to their consumer or customer or whatever. And I think that, that is difficult to have someone like that. But I think, going off of what Sophie said, if you find that person and listening to them, and you find that person and then you find how to solve their problem, or if you make a business case to that person who's going to be excited about sustainability, then that's how you make it happen. You have to provide them, make it interesting for them. So you can be the sustainability, trailblaze for your organization or for your company or for your organization, but it's really doing your research, understanding what matters to the people above you and then selling it to them. And that's the best way, I think, to create change. This happened to me in my own personal career and at my last organization. It started with a white paper, and this is what I can do for your company, and this is why sustainability matters. And then having that support person to then say, yeah, you're right, you sold it to me, now I'm gonna help get it in front of the next level of executives, and then really just selling to them, why it matters. And I think if you can do that and make the either short-term or long-term business case, then you're set and you can help make that change.
I draw from the point of selling ideas in what I'd like to say next, in that I often find myself, as I may have mentioned previously, I have a client-consultant relationship on a daily basis, and our clients are very much attracted to our consultancy because vertical farms are in vogue. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, these are hydroponic, vertically stacked LED-lit farms that are located near population centers in order to cut down the food miles from traditional agriculture sources. And a lot of the time, I would say 9 out of 10, there's much more cost-effective and environmentally sound ways to produce that food, and vertical farms are not the best option. And so in selling an idea that is true to our goals as a company in being sustainable, in providing the best solution to our clients, we often have to talk them out of what caused them to come to us to begin with. And I find that to be one of the biggest challenges of my job. And if we were to sell every vertical farm we were asked to build, we would be much more successful than we are today as a consultancy, but we would have our names on a bunch of failed operations. So there's a balance between public image and basically trying to stay true to our values.
Great. We can move on to the next question. So the challenge of sustainability is increasingly becoming a mainstream business issue. Let's talk about the resources and the resource revolution, quote unquote. Is it symptomatic that organizations can no longer take either supplies of cheap raw materials or the easy disposal of waste for granted? Any thoughts on that?
So I think that, this is, what in sustainability management we like to call low-hanging fruit. I think that there's so many ways that companies can be smarter and really, disposable waste, if for nothing else, to get ahead of regulation. What I'd like to say to that is there's competitive advantage to be doing the right thing. And now, in where we're at in today's technology, not only is there a competitive advantage to it, but the transparency that's kind of demanded with technology today, your consumers, your customers, whatever group of people that you're serving, they're going to be able to find out what you're doing. And so getting ahead of all those issues, whether it be socially or focused on regulation, there is a benefit from doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
I find in the nonprofit sector that, literally this question, but in this Greater Boston Food Bank example that I was talking about earlier, just to find the kind of data, so it's not just making the connection that, hunger is unhealthy, but doing the kind of research that shows how wasteful and inefficient it is when it comes to certain causes for health problems, and how sustainable access to healthier food is critical. Without it, it costs billions of dollars just to Massachusetts alone, much less other states. And to be able to create that motivation through the facts of impact around why something has to change, and how we're all cutting costs if it does change, can be a very powerful message indeed.
Great. All right, we'll move on to the next question. So what about focusing on risks related to social, political, and regulatory shifts that may shape the business environment in unexpected ways as environmental problems become increasingly pressing? Have you had experience in this in your current role or in your career?
I think that this is interesting for me because trying to get, again, the private sector and the public sector to talk, you have to look at risk, right? So I was talking about mining earlier. One of the major risks that you can cite with sustainability when you're talking to a mining company is, hey, like if you don't take the community's interests into account, you might lose your social license to operate. That translates to a lot of lost money. And that's when people sit up and listen. You know, if you're talking to Coca-Cola and climate change, instead of showing them pictures of melting ice caps and polar bears that they cannot relate to, well, their logo, right? It's polar bears. But anyway, talk to them about their supply chain. Where did they get the sugar that goes into their ingredients? Where do they manufacture that? What are the supply chain routes? If they get their sugar from the Caribbean and it got flattened by a hurricane, how much money did it take to find another source? And I think that's what I'm kind of talking about when I say finding out or aligning their interest with yours and speaking their language. And I think that speaks to the resource revolution that Sarah and Marcia were talking about, and also this question about risks, focusing on the risks and using them, I think, to bring everyone to the table and start talking. It's been interesting.
Yeah, I remember during that the environmental collapse of Haiti yet again, that so much aid was being sent, and so the tsunami in Banda Aceh, another Indonesia, how people in the nonprofit sector were just sending blankets to people and sending expired drugs to people, and all of this stuff meaning well, but not knowing that they didn't need blankets and they didn't need expired drugs and they didn't need all of these things, and in so many cases not having those data resources or that kind of coordination or the use of the technology tools to have that kind of transparency, to know how to get that kind of passion for giving and connect it to what people really need in the time they need it, in the way that makes a difference. Those inefficiencies still are very socially troubling as well as politically troubling, and I think that's where if we had a resource revolution in that area, it would certainly be the increased use of data and data philanthropy to allow some of these organizations to be able to create infrastructures that can give them the transparency they need to serve.
Absolutely, and Marcia hit on a really strong point, and also Sophie as well with the supply chain. So let's switch gears a little bit, right? Being the career coach I am, I'm thinking about sort of your career trajectories, those of you in the room. So with many social structures around the world that are under stress, many organizations see this as an opportunity to significantly differentiate themselves from their competitors by creating entirely new business models to address the challenges that we face. With challenges may come a need for aligning new talent or training existing talent to overcome these challenges. So what skill sets, speaking to kind of some of our students and alumni in the room, would you recommend to students and alumni to focus on to really align themselves as the talent to hire in your organization or to be on your team in order to really make an impact in this area?
So a lot of the people I see in my field are engineers, plant scientists, greenhouse operators, and I do not believe there exists a program specifically related to vertical farming in the educational space. So it draws from a bunch of different fields. especially greenhouse production. So we see a lot of folks coming over from the greenhouse world into vertical farms, also the cannabis industry as well. And so yeah, it's a really new space, and it's really interesting to see the types of backgrounds that are kind of populating the space, but mostly engineering.
I think in international development, you want languages, you want experience living and or working in developing countries, and be able to demonstrate that. Not just having visited, but studied abroad, Peace Corps, or taken assignments abroad. And then I think everyone comes to international development with this idea that they're going to be holding the starving babies or planting the trees. That's just not true. And everyone that comes to me, I try to drive that home, like what any industry needs is practical skills. Are you organized? How do you organize yourself? Are you good in Excel? Can you manage a budget? Can you read a contract and negotiate a salary with a consultant? Simple things that I think cross-cut every single industry. We tend to gloss over those and talk about our technical expertise. By technical expertise, I mean, I know about agriculture, I know about food security, I know about poverty rates. That's wonderful. That's your driver. That's why you're there. I want to know how you can help my life on a day-to-day basis, working alongside you. And then that, and especially with mission-driven organizations, I've been on the other side of recruitment panels, and if I didn't want to see that person every day, I probably wouldn't rank them as high. Like you want to be a positive person that believes in the mission, that is congenial and like a good team player, right? I think maybe in other industries that are more competitive, that doesn't matter as much, but certainly in development, it is all about kind of the soul. I think that the reason I got hired when I was 22 is because the last question was, why should we hire you? And I said, because I want to work for a company with a soul, in a way that matters. And it was so cheesy, but I think that they felt the same way. And so that don't discount that either.
That's a great answer, right? How many people have heard that answer before? I've never heard it, but I would have hired her too for that. You're joining people, not organizations, right? We've heard that as a theme during Career Week. Very important. Now you're hearing it again. Earlier today, we heard from Facebook, and they were talking about global cultural fluency and impact. Those two things they're looking for.
Yeah.
Marcia, what do you look for?
Curiosity. People who are really genuinely interested in why things are the way they are and why can't they be better, or listening to people of vastly diverse backgrounds and bringing those viewpoints to the table, always bringing other perspectives to the table, always being able to find those perspectives and not being afraid to get them, not being afraid to get out of your cultural comfort zone to learn. So I think it's people who are passionate for the listening. We talk about that so much, but it's essential to be able to allow people to tell their stories to their fullest capacity. It's not about us, it's about how we go about doing that. And I know there's so much out there about how the bad media, the fake news and all of this other stuff, but there still is no substitute for a story authentically told in a way that gets to a point and kind of helps us to see our stories and the stories of others. And I think that whole idea about bridging those divisions to create that kind of baseline so that we can work together, regardless of what it is, and start to translate for each other. I think we have to start with listening. So I think those skills to listen, to ask questions, to kind of be humble about what you know, and to have the skill sets to be able to capture those stories, or to learn how to capture those stories is essential.
Sarah?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing I would say is try to make yourself the expert. So I think there's, think outside the box on that. One way to do that is really to understand whatever topic that you want to go into that job for, and there's something that you want to help that company with. Understand what the company's problem is, or wherever you want to go, the job that you're trying to get, figure out the problem, and then how you'll be part of the solution for it. Specifically, I think, for example, if you're an expert on sustainability, you're a student right now, and there's a field you're really interested in going into, I would highly recommend, you have to continue, you're obviously already starting that path of really understanding. You're in school right now, you're really, just make sure you take the time to really learn everything you can about that topic and really connect. This is where networking actually, it's more than just saying networking, it's actually going out and learning from the best professionals in that area. Connecting with them on LinkedIn, doing your informational interviews, really understanding, reading the books of really smart people who are, the top in the field, and then you're going to be able to take those best practices to whatever job you want to go to. I think also, in this day and age, people have personal websites to promote themselves, and it definitely applies to certain areas in certain industries. I think one thing that I would recommend is if you become an expert in a subject, write articles about it and post it on LinkedIn. And then every time you see a topic every time you read an article regarding this topic that you plan on showing recruiters that you are the expert in, start posting that on LinkedIn. Keep it really positive, keep it very focused on whatever area you want to be the expert in. And then when they go to look at your LinkedIn page, here you have all the information that points to why you are an expert in that area. So those are that's a very specific, but these are some things that I would recommend in making yourself an expert.
Great insight, and great recommendations. Actually, for those of you that were at the panel earlier today, the Google moderator, right, Nicholas, he actually got his job, he said, at Google from blogging on LinkedIn. And if you heard the keynote speech from Daniel, he also got his job from posting on LinkedIn articles and writing about it. So thank you for that. So reimagining sustainability as a central strategic issue for organizations it's easier to talk about than to do. Every significant strategic shift over the last 50 years, from analog to digital, from local to global, from systems to products, has encountered the classic impediments to change, from the concern that it won't work, and it isn't happening, to we won't make any money from it, right? How have you each pivoted in your career when you didn't have either the bandwidth or the people to get it done, when the whole was larger than the sum of its parts?
Okay, so I was in the newspaper industry, okay, and that was had to be pivoted, and I think it was just again to experiment and to see that if everybody was not reading newspapers and people were going onto the web, to start online magazines, start online podcasts, start bringing people around the table to have new conversations and using the internet for free distribution. And it still is surprisingly easy to do. And I think for organizations now, and certainly organizations that I work with, kind of overlook these avenues to kind of start talking about what they do and to bring people to the table to partner with, to leverage partnerships now to be stronger and to have more impact outside their own walls. And I think that's part of that movement toward organizing organizations to come together for sustainable solutions. I think organizations, if they see themselves too in new ways, they're really in the publishing business. They're all in the media business now, because I think it's something like, and my students hear this a lot, something like now up to 67% of the people who go to the Louvre never walk in the front door. You know, they just come in online. And so to be able to translate that into fundraising, into donors, into bringing people in, again, is about using all these different platforms to meet with people and partner with people that you may never meet physically, and it can be incredibly empowering and powerful for a nonprofit organization and a social cause.
Great.
I think my context is a little bit different because I'm focused on climate change, and I think that the poorest countries, unfortunately, are seeing the worst effects of climate change, so they're quite aware that something needs to be done, and they're the ones clamoring for help. So I don't face that problem there. On the other hand, you know, there are the skeptics in the private sector, the big guys, the investors that say, oh, it's not profitable, or why should we do that? CSR doesn't make sense, you know, times are tight, we need to cut costs. And my approach to them at this point is to shrug, because there are so many other people that recognize the real opportunities and the real risks there and are willing to do something about it, that we're going with them, and this is moving ahead whether or not they choose to believe it. And if they don't get on the bandwagon, they're gonna lose money, right? I think that the Professor Bruce Kahn in sustainability management, he really just like shakes the earth that you're standing on when you are in his class, and it's very overwhelming to present to him because he really rattles you. But I remember him talking about why he believes in ESG. And he said very simply, it's information arbitrage. I'm working with more information than everyone else. So I'm gonna make a more informed decision about my investments. And so for me, that's what it boils down to. If someone says it doesn't work, I'm like, okay, you're working with different information. I follow Bruce Kahn's lead, and I'd rather have more and consider a few more aspects to every decision that I make. So yeah, I guess my answer is okay.
No, that's a good point.
I think what I would say is I was in the position where I got hired to do a completely different role than sustainability, and I said to Rent the Runway, you know, yes, I have my full-time position with you, but I want to lead your sustainability strategies, and this is why, and this is what I can do for you. And I think that you know, when I would, you know, go meet people and they were like, so, you know, who's your sustainability team? I'm like, you're looking at them, like, and I don't get to do this all the time either. And so I think that every organization, and actually if you really want to do sustainability somewhere, going in and there's not a sustainability team is probably one of your best opportunities to actually do that. I think that the best way to make change is the first project you make, the first project that you push for, make it a project that's totally worthwhile, and then everyone is gonna be behind you. So, for example, I launched a recycling initiative that reduced our cost by so much. It could basically pay for any future sustainability projects that I wanted to work on. And I think that if you can reduce costs and then also on top of that create new revenue streams, and they're out there, and for sustainability projects, you can do both of those things. Just find the one that makes most sense to your company, and then you can start with very little. You might have to start with, you're gonna have to do it on the side of your full-time position, but there is a way to launch sustainability strategies, and then once you do take in that revenue, then you can actually be like, okay, great, now I'm gonna take that money that we just earned from that, or I'm gonna take that money that we just saved, and now I want to start this project with that fund. So I think be really strategic. Start with the projects that don't cost any money, and then move on from there, or very little upfront cost, and then show how quickly they'll get the return on investment, right? So if you have to pay for some equipment up front for recycling, let them know, okay, this will be paid off by this point, and oh, by the way, you're going to make so much money after the fact for it. So you can be scrappy. Like there are plenty ways to make sustainability happen even without any money.
I think I would like to reiterate the point of staying scrappy. A lot of the time in consulting, we have to deal with projects that are not the sum of their parts, or wholes that are not the sum of their parts, and you really just have to double down and keep searching for solutions and present those solutions in the best way you can, and be careful about which clients you take. So that's another very important point.
Fantastic. So we've gotten to hear a little bit about how they've combined their career and life vision, basically taking what they're good at, what they're really passionate about, and aligned it very clearly with the needs of the world. So I just have one more question. I'm going to open it up to questions for the audience. Thinking ahead, right? So we sort of examined this week about careers, or you're not looking for just a job, you're looking for careers, multiple careers. You can have 2, 3, or 4 careers. You can have a 30 or 40-year career runway. So for each of you, what is your projected 30 to 40-year career runway? So what's next? And I want you to think about sort of career and life vision as well. So author, mother, what's your career bucket list, quote unquote? How do you plan on getting there? And what advice do you have for people in the audience that are maybe aspiring towards more than one career, sort of following in your footsteps?
I was really hoping we wouldn't get to this question because I don't plan more than 2 years ahead of time. So I'm starting a new job in April 3rd. Yeah, and I think that's certainly the next 2 years. And personal and professional, I wanted to move back to Europe, so I'm knocking that off. I want to see most countries in Europe. I will knock that off. This career move brings me a little bit closer, not to a goal, but a function that I want to serve, like a knowledge base that I've been looking for since I left Chemonics before grad school, is trying to, again, connect the motivation with practicality, right? So in this case with Cicero, I'll be learning how to rank green bonds on a scale of greenness and helping companies or banks that are issuing the green bonds improve the greenness of their bonds, right? That'll be a very specific skill that I think is not unique but new-ish. And then the climate risk analysis for companies, I think, will be super useful as well. After that, I would like to I think the UN is a little bit slow and frustrating sometimes, but I wouldn't be opposed to coming back to it in some capacity. Definitely would love to move over to an asset manager and work from within a massive investor to help inform opinions. And I have not thought beyond that. I guess family somewhere in there. I want another dog. A yard and a guest room. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you. Marcia, we gotta get to Marcia. Marcia, you're an author. So many different titles. What's next for you?
I think the common narrative there is different ways to tell stories that people aren't talking about, and bringing voices to the table that aren't being heard. And the old thing in an immigrant family, especially an immigrant family that comes from a place that was politically challenged. My grandfather used to say, okay, whatever you do, learn how to type, okay, but then do anything, but hold power accountable. And it was very interesting because it was, I think, what got me into journalism to begin with, is to realize that even those small stories were, even to tell them was sometimes courageous. So writing and all of that is kind of the same thing. And if you live your passion there are many outlets for that, and there are many ways to do what you do. If you're a storyteller and translator, you can do that in a lot of different ways. And right now, over the next couple of years, we're creating something called the New Narratives Project, which is bringing together in an anxious world and a country, this one that I love, all sorts of tensions and divisions and arguments and so on and so forth, but to how to bridge those divides and to identify those people who can do that and who are doing that kind of work, and what kinds of insights they can give us about each other, and the kind of leaders we need to be.
It's beautiful, and you articulated it so beautifully, like just the way it's so deeply rooted all the way with the quote from my grandfather. Thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to get into options trading and retire in 2 years. I'm just kidding. More than what I would like to do, I would like to stay in my industry. I find it very interesting, but I would like to see a lot of legislative changes happen to account for what goes into our current food system. I'd like to see a carbon tax and carbon credits. I would like to see more justice for migrant workers. I would like to see the efficiencies and costs, the efficiency increase and cost of LEDs come down so that vertical farms can compete with their peri-urban greenhouse counterparts. So more than what I would like to do, I think there's a lot of changes that I would like to see, and I would just like to be in the industry that I'm in when those happen.
I think for me, I'm just so excited for this really big career shift to Green Matters. And I think that there's so much education for Green Matters to be able to share with a growing audience, education on sustainability, and make it really accessible for everyone to make everyday changes in their daily lifestyle, and not just keeping it at an arm's length away, right? So that the bigger impacts, like small changes that people can make, are going to be the things that make huge impacts. And that's going to influence regulation, and that's going to influence businesses continuing to do the right thing or shifting to doing the right thing. So I think for me, I'm in this great exploratory phase of this new company for me. And so for me, it's really hard to look past what we're doing right now and, even getting past to 6 months at my new company. I think in the long term, I am really excited about teaching in the future. I think that it's something that I'm called to, so I'm really excited about helping to teach the future leaders, whether they be business leaders or sustainability leaders. I actually think they're eventually, and are already happening, that those are going to be one and the same. So I think right now, the biggest bucket list that I have is to be a professor one day. So, yeah.
Beautiful. You clearly can see that the work that they do is so fundamentally aligned with who they are and the situations that bring out the best in them. So thank you for sharing that. I think we're really lucky to have such an amazing panel tonight. Clearly, I'm inspired. I know you're all inspired just to see them really living their passion and following a dream towards a cause that is not that easy to do, right? Especially when you have so many challenges. Let's go ahead and open it up to question and answer. Yes.
I'd like to thank the panel for their insight. My name is Michael Mumji. I'm a SUMA class of 2012 graduate. One of the kind of key themes that we've talked about all week, and certainly today, is a question of why, right? A question of motivation and what drives us into this field. I think that potentially for all of us, it's a little bit different. For me, when I applied in 2010, the truth that I sort of felt was this idea that in order for us to continue to have civilization as we know it, we needed to promote renewable energy as the source of energy to basically drive us forward, and that would potentially solve all of our other problems around water, agriculture, poverty, whatever it was, right? So if I'm a hammer, my nail is renewable energy. All of us here, kind of, if you're still here now at this hour, then you have kind of bought into this idea that we are probably at a precipice. And so, given all of your respective whys, which we've heard, Hassan talked about the image of that child. Sophie basically said, look, why can't rich people just give a little bit of their money to all the poor? Wouldn't that solve our problems? Given kind of your why and sort of the truth of where you are today and sort of that career and narrative arc that you've talked about a little bit, if you could solve one problem that you believe would basically, make the rest irrelevant or go a long way toward that, what would that be? Thank you very much.
Would you quickly just say your name and program as well?
Sorry. Michael Mumji, Sustainability Management, 2012.
Thank you. I'd like to kick that one off.
I'd like to include a discussion of sustaining democracy as part of the sustainability conversation.
The first thing that pops to mind for me is food waste, food distribution. I think maybe I'm stealing your thunder.
No.
But I'm very passionate about it. Okay, wonderful. I agree with you. I think energy is a major pivot point because we've projected this lifestyle that we have all around the world, and everyone wants it, and that makes sense. But if they get it the way that we got it, we're not going to do very well as a collective. So yes, energy, absolutely. But also my other thing is really we already produce enough food to feed everybody. We just waste it, and we allow kind of, sorry, but like marketing companies to dictate to kind of, I feel like we lead very unhealthy lives, right? We eat too much and then we solve it with medication. And I think if we just adjusted our consumption patterns, not just food consumption, but product consumption, I'm talking in circles. The problem I would solve would be consumer habits.
Yeah. I kind of agree. I'm coming from being in the fashion industry. I really think that, I love the rental models. I love the consignment models. I think, what that, goes towards is the idea that consumers are aware. I mean, it's so hard to choose one topic. I mean, of course, food, but then you look at textile waste and overconsumption, and the fashion industry is the second largest polluting industry after oil. So then it's like, wait, how can you not say, of course, fashion? And every single person in this room, you're all wearing clothes. we're all clothed tonight. I think there's so much, and I really think your point is accurate. It is overconsumption. I mean, that's really the big change. So, whether or not it's energy and you turn the lights off at night, you find ways to reduce your energy footprint at home, whether you find ways to love fashion but do it in a responsible way, whether you find ways to love food but do it in a way where you're eating local, or there's so much. I think if you think of the problem from the one big huge problem, it's almost harder to solve. I think if you look at yourself as an individual and then you look at what you can do at whatever company you're at or whatever organization you're at and what you can do as an individual to influence, and I think that's where this, again, going back to these ideas of very small changes, they actually have huge impact. So, I mean, you could literally just say this year, I'm gonna say no to plastic. There's so much out there. So I would almost, I think the idea of managing consumption, and then that just, it transcends verticals of whether it's food or energy or fashion and style. I would say that would be the biggest thing.
I would actually agree with the gentleman that next to free and very clean energy would be, solve a multitude of problems. and perhaps some tunnel vision because I deal with it every single day in our OpEx models, and it's always imperative for our operations and the operations of our clients to reduce that cost. So I guess it's just from a deep down desire for more efficient operations.
Great question, by the way. I'll just add to it. I think the coordination of humanitarian activities, like when I was traveling, we saw there was just no standards. You had so many different NGOs doing interventions in different countries with very different approaches. And I'll give you an example. So in Afghanistan, when I was there, I was basically on the Kandahar border, right? So with Quetta, Chaman, if you know Chaman, right, there's a tribal area, it's extremely dangerous. That's where I was mugged and almost kidnapped. So the people there were, these are refugees. There's 5 million refugees. There's no security, right? People were killed for 50 cents. And to get there, they were running away from the war, right? So you're running away from the war. So we're driving through these, dirt roads, these really high mountainous areas, scariest thing ever to be in these taxis going to this area. But, once we got there, they basically said that, our crops were destroyed. We ran away. And what we really want is someone to teach us how to make rice or potatoes. We don't want helicopters to drop peanut butter because it's making us sick. We don't like the water because of the chlorine that they're putting in. It doesn't taste. So I think there's a lot of research out there that's sort of Western diagnosis, and sometimes they fail to understand that it just doesn't apply over there, right? You have to really pay attention to the cultural sensitivities of those areas and really talk to the local populations and really figure out a way to coordinate the humanitarian efforts so that it's not scattered. To kind of Marcia's point earlier today, there's so many agencies that if only we could figure out a way for them to work together, we could help resolve it faster. You have some organizations that are first responders, others that are good at other things, and if you could just figure out a way to prioritize them all. And I know that the UN does a lot of work in this, but for me that would be one of them as well. Gary. You can go.
How about if I just come up and talk?
Sure. On stage. Gary's from our Applied Analytics program. Come on up.
No, I don't.
You gotta use.
It's really hard to hear you because you're.
Oh, really?
I mean, we're close.
We had 2 mics.
I don't. My question is, where is the intersection between food and sustainability? Because I'm reading now that the American lifetime of life, the age of life for Americans is declining. And a lot of it is related to sugar and all the other chemicals in our food. And so what can be done in the agricultural area? And I think you're kind of in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it possible, and is organic foods scalable, organic farming scalable to meet
Yeah, I do believe that there is quite a bit of available land that's underutilized, especially close to population centers, and that should be used to its full capacity. We actually, we do deal with organic farms, but a lot of hydroponics is not technically organic because there's no soil involved. So we produce local food, and our clients produce local food. And a lot of the time, local food is more nutritious than organic food that has been shipped across the country due to the food miles issue. So the whole debate between local and organic is actually kind of pushing more in the favor of local food, according to market studies and economic trends. But where I think it's really a mixed bag. We really need all these solutions simultaneously. It's not really one or the other.
I was thinking about Marcia's opening
and
the collaboration of all these industries.
Absolutely, and the tech sector as well. We need better LEDs. We need better microgrid applications. We need more efficient solar panels, more efficient wind turbines to bring that power cost down. And provide clean power to these operations so that local farmers can be as carbon efficient as outdoor organic farmers.
And I think we need to make hunger more of a public health issue, and have hospitals, when they ask you, how are things going at home, for example, or, you know, they're looking for signs of abuse, and they're looking, but do they ever ask you, you know, what was the last meal that you ate? So it's kind of this sense of incorporating it into our definition of public health. And then from there, kind of those policy questions that are going to bring and systemic change that can coordinate these groups, so that somebody who's really good in distribution is doing distribution, somebody who's really good in the health aspect of this, so that hospitals aren't just discharging people, but if they know that there's a hunger challenge, discharging people with that right mix of a diet and coming up with how you can eat better on $5 a day and all of these other things.
I was in your opening film. I saw Domino Sugar coming down, and
that's the bad thing. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
We need to end the corn subsidy.
Thank you for asking the question. I think it's a really complex issue, and I think we need to think about it in the US context, or like the Western world context, but how that interacts with the developing world as well, because all of our excess that leaves us overfed and undernourished also leaves other people underfed. And I think personally, I know this is very unpopular, but that's one of the reasons I stopped eating meat a long time ago. And it's never going to happen, but that's one of the things that I mean when I say consumption habits. I'm worried about them. As people gain more income, they equate wealth and success with a steak dinner. And that steak dinner has such massive ramifications in terms of sustainability and health. Those are the kind of like little decisions and cultural differences, cultural shifts that I think that need to happen if we're actually going to make this work. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, Gary. I mean, my father actually was a PhD in agriculture, so in soil, actually. So he was an agricultural chemist, and when I was about 6 years old, he made me do a science fair project called Pesticides in Fruits. And so I think, you know, we could start with just labeling, right? Labeling GMOs, and there's countries in Europe where it's mandatory. So, you know, we've heard tonight that there's an excess of food in the world, right? There's an excess of food in the world, and poverty is man-made. It's not natural. I think we were there.
Hassan, just to respect the time of our panelists and make sure that we do have enough time for everybody to engage in some networking and enjoy the refreshments, should we limit the number of questions before we go on to the networking portion?
Sure. Should we, I think 2 more questions, and we can open it up to networking. Does that sound good? All right. We're over time.
She's smiling. Good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mohamed Diallo. I'm a graduate student here in the nonprofit management program. To come to the question of the gentleman here, if we are to solve the world's problem, it is to tell or to show people how to tell their stories. And I'd like to say that Marcia not only walks her talk, but she talks her work. And my name is Mohamed, as I said. I'm from Guinea-Conakry. The question is it only important to tell the stories or to teach people how to tell their stories? And how would someone who is the story itself could be able to articulate what he or she is? So as I grew up in my country, I was really a shy person, and I witnessed a lot of things that I could not well articulate. French is my first language. So I realized that those people around me needed to speak something, to say something, and there were conflicts because people could not be heard, and they could just be undermined and their opinions not taken into account. So it is difficult for someone who has an inner belief and that person cannot express it. She spoke of their intervention with, Sophie, spoke of our intervention in Guinea. I don't know which of Guineas, but I'd like to ask, how do you go about deconstructing preconceived cultural beliefs and promote sustainable development policies to people that do not basically have access to education? And on the other hand, how do you translate to make sure that you speak the language of private companies while they are profit-driven, to make sure that they implement socially responsible policies? So that's my main question to you.
Could you repeat the first part of the question? I got the second, but the first part of the question?
Yeah, the first question, how do you go about deconstructing preconceived cultural norms, because there are resistance due to lack of education somewhere, that could not allow people to show them that what you are proposing them in terms of, sustainable development or climate change, because someone who does not have access to electricity and is using coal to cook, a lot of women are, going through that. How do you educate them, and what other alternative do you provide them, because you're working in developing countries, not here where we have access to electricity and other resources?
Yeah, good question. I think that we are in a unique time for your particular question, because renewable energy is, the technology is making that energy source viable. It's cheaper a lot of times than the alternative. So we have a unique opportunity to surmount that prejudice that the developing world has. They want big and fancy and new, and they want to grow, and that makes sense, and they should, and they have every right. And right now, our job is to prove, I think with just information, that renewable energy technology or energy efficiency will save them money and deliver the services that they need to grow. We're just uniquely positioned to do that now, so it's really exciting. Shifting cultural norms, that's really hard. I think that public education campaigns, right, and sometimes work. It depends. There's a whole discipline around behavior change communication. Unfortunately, I think what I know best is climate change, and I find that people react most when they suffer from it. When it becomes real to them, when it's hurt their crop, and they need to know what they can do to protect their own. I think that is why the developing countries are clamoring for support, and why the Green Climate Fund exists, and unfortunately why a lot of the Western countries don't respond, because they haven't suffered from it yet. The shifting cultural norms, I'm not sure I have an answer other than experience and real information. You asked a question about the private sector, how to engage with them. There's more nuance to it that I didn't get.
Because they are traditionally profit-driven,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes if you take into consideration some environmental concerns or social concerns.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in Guinea, where you have Rio Tinto or other mining industries, in the areas where they are, the local communities live in a very poor, situation,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they don't take care of those people who are not even, certain in employments that those people could secure. And oftentimes that results into social conflicts there. So how do you engage the private sector to take responsible policies towards those communities?
I think you just answered your own question. And if you want more information, you should take Jenik Radon's course at SIPA. And Sarah already mentioned this, and we've talked about this a little bit, this idea that there are risks inherent in not paying attention to sustainability. It's really real, and it's very translatable into compelling arguments to get the private sector on board. So in the case that you raised, Rio Tinto man, there are so many things that you could approach Rio Tinto with. For example, the communities themselves. Rio Tinto, I think there were issues with pollution or water contamination of the local water source, so the water wasn't potable anymore, and they, instead of tacitly accepting it, they created conflict. And so the term that Janek Radon uses is they lost their social license. Rio Tinto lost their social license to operate, and that cost the company money. Every day that they weren't operating, it cost them money. On top of that, and this is what Sarah mentioned, social media technology is incredibly powerful and is being used as a lever. It's a double-edged sword, and I'm really upset that some leaders have access to it at all. But in other cases, I think it's really a force for good because, for example, I don't remember what class it was. I think it was Bose's CBA class. We were talking about Victoria's Secret and how they sourced their cotton from Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan, someone went to the cotton field in Uzbekistan and got footage of a child picking cotton and crying. And that image that was associated with Victoria's Secret caused an overnight backlash. And people, our generation, a youthquake, if you will, we decided to not engage with Victoria's Secret, and they lost a ton of money. So all of a sudden, these issues on the ground matter, and companies have to pay attention. Social license to operate is a real driver now, and I think that social media can arm us with the data, the information, the transparency that we lacked before.
That shared awareness is so important, and it can be used strategically here as a lever.
All right. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but you get a little bit of time during the networking session. Let's please give a real warm round of applause for our fantastic panelists. Marcia, Sophie, Javed, and Sarah, thank you for your insight. Thank you very much. We're honored to have you here. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.